Thank you all for coming to the 2020 conference organized by the Korean Association of Science and Technology Studies. The Korean STS Association was established 20 years ago, so we are celebrating our 20th anniversary in this conference. Today, we are privileged to have three special guests from Japan and Taiwan, and a vice president of our association to speak in the first session, titled STS in East Asia, Redrawing STS Map. I will briefly introduce the first speaker, Professor Masashi Shirabe, who is going to talk about a brief history of STS in Japan and the future of STS in Asia. And each speaker will be given about 20 minutes, okay? And the audience, if you have any question, just using the chatting function, right? And then I will take about one or two very very quick Q&A, and then move on to the next speaker. And towards the end of our session, I mean, after having 4 presentations, I will have a kind of a roundtable discussion among the 4 speakers, and then also some other the questions from the audience, and so that we may be able to talk about STS in East Asia in general as well as in particular. So let me introduce Professor Shirabe. Masashi Shirabe is professor of the Institute of Liberal Arts at Tokyo Institute of Technology. He's responsible for teaching science and technology studies as general education and supervising master and doctoral students in the field. Professor Shirabe specializes in science and technology studies and scientometrics. He received his BS in mathematics, MA and PhD in general systems science studies from the University of Tokyo. He co-edited Prescriptions in the Age of Science and Technology, which is among the first STS textbooks in Japan. Since then, he has co-authored STS books in Japanese and English, and scientometrics papers in English, lessons from Fukushima, Japanese case studies on science and technology and society in 2015 is among such books. With his colleagues, he studied the Japanese Society for Science and Technology Studies, JSTS, in 2001, and now serves as its president. And it's our privilege, and I hope we all welcome him with a big applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Professor Park. So let me start to share my PowerPoint. Let me read my manuscript because time is really limited. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Masashi Shirabe, the president of Japanese Society for STS. And today, I would like to give a talk entitled to Brief History of STS in Japan and the Future of STS in Asia. Before starting my talk, I would like to congratulate on the 20-year anniversary of the Korean Association of Science and Technology Studies. I would also like to express my sincere appreciation for your kind invitation to this important opportunity for the future development of STS in East Asia. Okay, please let me get down to business. But to be honest, I feel that the congratulation I just offered is the most important things for me today. Okay, these are the contents of my talk today. First, I will briefly introduce the first STS textbook published in Japan in 1819. This textbook was created based on the note of lectures given by Shunkichi Kimura at First Higher School, and it strongly reflects the influence of overseas scholars, especially British philosophers. STS education as a general education could be considered to have been the most advanced practice in the world then. However, even Japanese STS researchers were not aware of this history, and virtually nothing was left in Japan and in the world. This case seems to indicate that even if we introduce cutting-edge knowledge from overseas and move forward it will be difficult to achieve results in the world unless we can embed our outputs in an appropriate context. Then I shall look back on history and point out what is necessary to prevent Japan's modern STS from following such a path. What is needed would be solidarity in East Asia. Please allow me to say that much of the contents about the first STS textbooks in Japan, which I'm going to talk about, is based on my student, Ms. Masuda's doctoral dissertation research. She's writing a thesis on the life of Kimura, the author of the book, and his life certainly deserves historical research. For example, although he was born in Edo era samurai time, 150 years ago, not only did he study abroad, but he also built up his career in three sectors of academy, industry, and military. Then he eventually started his own business. His company was successful and remained one of Japan's leading companies until recently acquired. His first job after graduating from University of Tokyo is a physics teacher at First Higher School. A higher school is a combination of high school and college then, and was a part of the elite education system in Japan. He taught physics to humanities students there. Around that time, the curriculum of the school was changed, and the allotted class hours for his physics class became significantly shorter. So drastic changes of his class were required. Then, what he developed became similar to what we now call STS education. 2 years later, his lecture notes were published as a book, Principle of Science, and sold fairly well. These are the table of contents of his book. It consists of chapters about history of science, philosophy of science, epistemology, and so on. In its introduction, Outline of History of Science, Kimura wrote his opinion on pure science and its practical use. He wrote, at the end of the 18th century, the benefit of science were finally brought to society, and looking at the circumstances after this, he affirmed that it was clear that actual benefit would increase with the progress of science. However, he went on to say that this was not something that scientists had intended in advance, but by chance they had gained actual benefit. While business owes a great deal to science, science owes a great deal to business. Thus, business people must not despise scientists, and scientists must not despise business people. Both must work together. Don't you think it sounds something like STS? At the very least, I can say that it is not within the scope of HPS. As I mentioned, a notable point about the book is that it is the first STS textbook in Japan, but one of the most important series of books about history of science and technology in Japan says that science studies have been pursued in Japan since the 1910s, and that Introduction to Science, a lecture by Hajime Tanabe, which started in 1913, is known as the earliest lecture on science studies in higher education. This description could be a strong evidence that Kimura's book is the earliest. As another notable point from Masuda's papers, I would like to point out the strong influence of British philosophy of science. The work of Thomas Huxley and other British scholars appeared explicitly and implicitly in the book. In addition, Kimura's lecture included his original contents as well. Furthermore, it was an epoch-making practice in the world in that STS education was implemented as general education. So let me discuss what Kimura had done. He learned the latest academic trends in Europe, presumably as an influence of his colleague philosophers at First Higher School. He applied them to a new area and realized cutting-edge lectures, that is to say, education beyond the original by chance. However, his STS education has not taken root in Japan, nor has it been remembered even domestically. About 20 years after he left first higher school in 1893, the pursuit and education of STS, or I should call science studies, restarted from scratch. Then, why did such a gap of 20 years occur? Of course, we can say his attempt was too early. In addition, his STS education was introduced by chance and for personal reason, so it could not be accepted and positioned in a broader context. That's why its influence quickly disappeared. At the end of 1980s, we started to introduce modern STS and to develop them. Although there are many differences between Kimura's and our situations, I feel that we have something to learn from his episode. For that, I look back on history of modern STS in Japan. Unlike Kimura's time, on the eve of the introduction of modern STS, many relevant disciplines and activities had grown up in Japan. Some of them, such as the work of Shigeru Nakayama, have gained a certain degree of recognition even in the US. Among them, the tradition of science, history of science is particularly noteworthy. The Japan Society for the History of Science was established in 1941, and although it was interrupted by the war, its development after the war was smooth enough to host an international conference in 1974. History of science was taught in liberal arts education in not a few national and public universities. Perhaps one of the reasons is that history of science is convenient as humanities for science students and science for humanities students. As a result, a relatively large number of researchers specializing in history of science held positions at universities nationwide. They, especially alumni of the Department of HPS at University of Tokyo, became key players of introduction of modern STS. Some of them said it was because they recognized one path of history of science education, and they published several relevant books around 1990. Around the same time, STS Network Japan, a loose network involved in STS, was launched. The members of the network were teaching staff in universities, graduate students, school teachers, company employees, journalists, and officers of ministries and agencies. Its first representative is Hideto Nakajima, and he declared this definition of STS in the third symposium of the network in 1990. The vestiges of this definition can be seen in JSTS prospectus. Some of you may know that there are two academic organizations having STS in their names in Japan, JSTS and JSSTS. JSTS is an academic organization for sociology of science, but the boundary between STS and sociology of science is not clear, as you know. And actually, their memberships overlap considerably. JSTS started to take the form of academic society after the establishment of JSSTS, but they have been publishing journals regularly since 1992, long before the establishment of JSSTS. In 1995, 4S published Handbook of Science and Technology Studies. This publication provided one of the goals to Japanese STS community. And the next year's joint meetings of 4S and EAST at Bielefeld University in Germany was a milestone became a milestone for Japanese STS. At that time, we are planning to hold an international conference on STS. So more STS-related researchers from Japan than in the past participated in the conference and learned about the atmosphere and operation of international academic conferences. It is also noteworthy that at this time, we collected funds and supported the travel expenses of senior students. They experienced their first presentation at international conferences. At that time, in humanities and social sciences in Japan, it was rare for graduate students to present at international conferences. Since then, the STS community in Japan, especially its younger generation, seems to become more active in international exchange than in other academic fields. In 1997, one of the earliest textbooks of modern STS was published, which my colleague and I edited. Its contents will be briefly mentioned later. In 1998, we, as an independent and temporal body, held an international conference on STS. In Japan, while international academic exchange is the primary objective, it is also aimed at demonstrating to other countries that there is a large STS community in Japan, as well as demonstrate that there is a group of researchers in this field that could independently hold international conference in Japan. The latter also meant a demonstration to the funding agency. As a result of our efforts, a new relatively large funding program relevant to STS was launched in 2001. JSTS was established partly because it could serve as receptionists of the funds in a broader sense, and also because it could work as a representative organization of Japan for East Asian STS network. One of the STS-related projects adopted in the first round of this new funding program was the project led by Yuko Fujigaki, the former president of JSTS, and its important goal was to publish a Japanese version of STS handbook. We successfully published the book 4 years later. For more details, Yuko summarized the background in the EASTS journal in 2009. So in this year, 2005, there was a full-fledged talk of holding the 4th annual meeting in Japan. The ongoing activities then in the East Asian STS networks were the strong grounds for its approval at the 4th board meeting in the following year. In 2010, the international conference was successfully held in Tokyo as a joint conference of 4S and JSTS. This is another outcome of the institutionalization and internationalization of STS in Japan, which began at the 1996 Bielefeld Conference and continued for 15 years. Then, just 6 months after the conference, Japan was hit by the Great Earthquake and its subsequent catastrophe. This became a natural turning point not only for Japan, but also for Japanese STS. I'll take a little about it later. It has been our goal since 2005 to publish an English and updated version of our STS handbook. To that end, we got a new research fund and were preparing its publication. Although the contents were affected by the disaster, the plan was realized in 2015. And even though we are now under COVID-19, this year is a bumper year in terms of publishing. We published a 3-volume STS handbook, our second Japanese STS handbook. In addition, important books have been published by the younger generation, like Ryuma and Kota. I wish I could conclude that Japan's STS community had a bright future, but unfortunately, that is not necessarily the case. As some of you know, the Japanese academic community, not just STS, has been severely impacted by long-term negative economic growth and the declining youth population, and continues to shrink, unfortunately. Although Japan's STS situation is still better, still much better than others, it is getting more difficult. JSTS is currently working on a fundamental turnaround. So to get back to the point, we have compiled several STS textbooks and handbooks so far. What kind of changes are there? There are a few modern STS textbooks in the early days, but I'll use my edited one as an example. This and the following slides shows a table of contents of each book, but I won't go into their detail, so please take a look at them later. I shall point out what kind of change has occurred as a major trend. The feature of early STS textbook is that they provide content that remains influenced by relevant domains that exist before modern STS. However, as you could see from their content, they include STS perspectives. In addition, although specific examples have been introduced to a certain extent, the discussion remains relatively abstract. And while important topics are lined up, comprehensiveness is rarely achieved in those books. The first STS handbook focuses on case studies and how to implement case analysis. Theories and concepts are introduced in its glossary, though. Comprehensiveness is also taken lightly. The overall editorial intent seems to produce a guidebook for educating the next generation of STS researchers. And of course, the focus of 2015 handbook, English handbook, is inevitably Japan. The first part focusing on the nuclear accidents in Japan, and it is not just an advocacy of Japanism, but an attempt to separate Japan's unique factors and universality of the accident. That is complemented historically through case studies in part 2. You are in better position to judge how successful these efforts are than the authors are. First of all, it should be pointed out that our latest handbook has become more voluminous. On top of that, the contents become dramatically comprehensive, and in particular, the introduction of unprecedented approaches to the field reflects the enrichment of Japanese STS community. In addition, many chapters are devoted to discussing the relationship with other relevant fields, which suggests that STS as an academic field has been established to a certain extent, and our community has been formed to support them. Okay, I will skip this slide. In closing, let me talk a little bit about March 11, the impact of the Great East Japan earthquake and the subsequent accidents. March 11 had a big impact on me personally. From that time until now, I have specialized in both STS and scientometrics, but around 2010, I thought that I would focus more on scientometrics as a researcher. However, due to March 11, I felt strongly that I had no choice but to seriously study issues of the nuclear power plant accidents as a researcher of STS. If that accident hadn't happened, I wouldn't have spoken at the present opportunity. I believe that many members of STS community in Japan, after the nuclear disaster, had strong feelings and concerns about the way our field of expertise had been. Under these circumstances, accountability is required for individual researchers and for academic societies. On that point, Yuko Fujiwaki wrote, "The Fukushima nuclear power plant accidents after an earthquake in March 2011 have drawn the world's attention to the relationship between science, technology, and society in the high technology setting of Japan. Is the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident intrinsic to Japan? We can answer this question from Japonism perspectives as well as a universalism one. In any case, we need to put our experiences and findings in appropriate context. For that, one of the most important things is the perspective of East Asia, which links Japanism with universalism. Presumably, similar things can be said for relationships between Korea and the world." This graph shows the transition of cumulative numbers of COVID-19 infections per a million population by countries. As you may know, the suppression of the number of PCR tests for COVID-19 has become controversial in Japan, and the suppression has been led by our government. I couldn't believe it, but it's right. the government does insist that Japan's countermeasures to COVID-19 are so good that the number of patients is smaller than those in Europe and the United States. However, as you can see from this graph, the infection situation is quite different by regions or by continent. In this case, Japan should use East Asian countries as its benchmark, and if it does so, it is very clear that Japan's countermeasures have never been successful, and that Japan should learn from South Korea and other East Asian countries and the region. On the other hand, it is also true that the infection rate in Japan is still low in spite of Japanese relatively moderate measures, countermeasures, and there might be something that can be generalized through the filter of East Asia. I hope that Japan, as a good neighbor of countries and regions in East Asia, will continue to learn from Korea and other East Asian countries and the region, and study and cooperate with them in various fields, not just STS and academic issues. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And is there any question, chatting, or others? Maybe we can come back for the questions for
Wen-Hua.
Yeah, just a quick question that
Yes.
is any activities, I mean, when the JSTS will have the 20 years anniversary? Just curious about that. Because today we celebrate Korean STS Association's 20 years anniversary. I'm wondering whether JSTS will do that, I mean, in the coming year.
Yes, we are thinking, or we are considering. The one is, we may follow the way of 4S did. So they set up some sort of discussion forum, 2020, something like that. So it's mean that they reflected the 20 years of history of STS. Then they talk about the future of STS. I mean, also as I said, we just published 3 volumes of STS Handbooks, so it could be a sort of material for our, discussion for, celebration. So these are 2 ideas, and I will do at least one of them.
Okay. Any other questions? I couldn't see. No. All right. You can ask a question later on. Right. Our second speaker is Professor Wen-Ling Hong, whose title of the talk is 3C of Taiwanese STS: to connect, communicate, and collaborate. And let me introduce Professor Hong a bit. Professor Hong was trained as an engineering student, a scientist in the field of fluid mechanics. She entered the field of STS in 2007 with a teaching project aiming to bring STS courses to engineering curriculums. From that on, she has been an active contributor to the development of Taiwan STS, and Professor Hong has been engaging in studies about engineering ethics, public communication of science from an STS perspective, and gender in STEM. She was particularly interested in the knowledge production and practices of engineering. Her team followed the jurisdictional process of the Kaohsiung propane explosion in 2014 for 6 years. She and J.P. Wang, the Secretary-in-Chief of Taiwan STS Association, have visited Sewol-ho with Ji-Hyung-jeon and tried to understand how tragic and large-scale engineering disasters were investigated and perceived by the professional communities and the general public. Professor Hong's previous interview study of women engineers in civil, mechanical, and shipbuilding engineering revealed the importance of sponsors in their careers and the much needed transformation of the engineering workplace. She's also the chief editor of Taiwan Women E-Press, a 13-year-old newsletter about women in science and technology since 2017. Her recent research focuses on the just transition for the petrochemical fence line community and how offshore wind farm technology set foot in Taiwan. Since her election as a chairperson for Taiwan STS Association, Professor Hong has created many links, collaboration, and many ways of communication for the academic society. Open S Files, the award-winning science education TV programs, were fruit of an interdisciplinary team of STS and science media production. Taiwan STS Association also organizes 4 sessions of negotiation theaters and 1 workshop for the upcoming Taipei Biennale and on exhibition for promoting contemporary art held by Taipei Fine Art Museum with Bruno Latour as the co-curators. Looks like a very active, work in many different areas, and I'm looking forward to this the talk. And then Professor Hong.
Yeah, thank you very much for the long introduction. Let me share the screen. Is that good? Actually a professor in the department. So today I want to talk more about what we're doing and the current status of Taiwan STS. But before that, since I'm pretty young in this field, so but I will reveal a little bit of history of how STS set foot in Taiwan. So recently, Professor Huang Junru, he published a paper comparing the science education development with STS. So this one is actually correlated if we look back from our situation at today. So here we can see that in 1970s, the science communication or the science journal, pure science journal, started to enter the eyes of the public. And STS actually, from a general understanding, start from the History of Technology Division in the Graduate Institute of History in National Tsinghua University in Hsinchu. And at the time that we all know that Fu Dawei is an important player in this development. And at about the same time that the National Science Foundation started the Division of Science Education. So the role of Ministry of Science and Technology, or at that time National Science Foundation, is very important in the development of any academic field in Taiwan. So therefore, with their support, in late 1980s and 1990s, the STS community started to emerge from the History of Philosophy of Science group, and also bring in a lot of researchers about sociology in medicine. And in 1986, the first science education PhD program was established in Taiwan, and also the first science museum. So, and a lot more exciting things happened after 2000. So in 2001, we had the STM journal, the Taiwanese Journal of Science, Technology and Medicine, which is currently now the formal journal of Taiwan STS Association. But if you may notice that we actually had the journal before the association. So, and the journal until today was still published by the National Science and Technology Museum and edited by the STS scholars. So in 2004, we have the first STS conference, And as a result of the conference, they produced 2 reader books. This is one of that. So they translate some classic STS paper so the Taiwanese student can read them. And also they establish an early format of the early website that communicate between STS scholars. And this is very important that in 2006, the Ministry of Education sponsored a 1-week STS workshop for professors, especially for professors in science and technology and medicine. So I participated in that workshop, and that was my first encounter to STS. And we had Professor Ulrike Felt and Professor Sang-Wook Yoon with us for 1 week. And that is very important because for that grant in 2007, we were able to support about 5 or 6 3-year projects to bring STS courses into the College of Medicine, the College of Engineering. And that is a boon for us to recruit more professors and more researchers in other fields into STS. In 2007, important year that Yang-Ming Graduate Institute established, and we also had the first issue of ESTS, which Wen-Hua will talk more about it. And like I said before, the full bloom of STS teaching project. So in 2008, Taiwan STS Association formally established, and that one was held jointly with the EASTS in conference. And at the time, 2010, Ministry of Science and Technology started a new discipline called Education of Science Popularization and Communication. And this later renamed as STS and Communication at the bottom left-hand side. And this discipline, which is a founding discipline, right now is one of the main disciplines that the STS scholar in Taiwan will go and seek founding. It's actually under the Division of Science and Science Education, but now a part of Division of Humanity because they merge science education with humanity. So, and the point is that it's not actually under sociology. So in 2019 and 20, I started to act as a chairperson in 2018. So I applied for the founding to most in 2019, 2020. We were able to get a very good founding from a Ministry of Science and Technology. And this really put us in a very stable situation. So we were able to hold conferences and support all kinds of activities that proposed by our members. So one of the 2 recent interesting accomplishments is, like I said in my introduction, is the OpenDX file, which is here. I will talk about this later. Okay, and this is the initiator in 2008. Many of them that you might know, you might find familiar. Our first chairperson, our second chairperson, and also Wen-Hua and Jia-Xin, which is the director of Yang-Ming's Institute. And here I list a set of our poster, and just to go through them very quickly, we can roughly see how things changes and how our focuses changes over the past 10 years. So the first one in 2009, which is very beautiful conference and very beautiful name as featuring a better world. And that is what we have been doing, is to connect with many other fields in Taiwan, engineering, and at the time the literacy or become, like we say, 素养 in Chinese, become a keyword. So you can see the following two conference within that. And this is also working, STS work very closely with the large grant from Ministry of Education. So there has been about continuously 6 to 7 years that STS support this kind of grant, which is an interdisciplinary grant, to have these courses open in traditionally science and technology departments. Then we talk about social transformation, and this one, the 6th conference in 2014, that we talked about social transformation, and ironically and interestingly, that followed by the Sunflower Student Movement. This is a very important movement in Taiwan, and it's the largest civil disobedience movement since 1980s. So this actually brings a new wave of younger generation who are very eager to learn about knowledge of any kind, which can support their acting and their involvement in changing the society. And fortunately, STS has been one of them, that the younger generation found very useful. So at a conference, we were able to invite foreign speakers like this 8th conference. And the 10th conference, we review what we've been doing for the past 10 years, and we look forward to another 10 years. And this is our past 2 conference. The conference this year was postponed to July, and we were one of the first conference in Taiwan, which we held in-person conference after the semi-lockdown. And this one previously had been set to discuss the distance to science policy, and we found it very useful at the time of pandemic. So we put in a forum about the COVID-19 and many other things. And this is the science policy, to get involved with science policy and get our research used by science policy is one of the key objective that we're doing right now in Taiwan. So overall, we have just over 200 members, and half of them are faculty member. And because we have very liberal policy, so we have a lot of graduate students. And 40% are female. And this is a very, very precious field that we are very inclusive and friendly for all participants. And here I tried to list all the different kind of people, which made me very nervous because I would be afraid that I left out anyone. So we are very inclusive. We are very happy to see newcomers, and basically in Taiwan, we haven't really talked about the boundary of STS anymore for quite a few years. So we're happy to include STS in all the discussion about interesting topics which are useful and topics which are sought for the current social needs. And this is a picture taken from this year's conference. So I want to introduce some of the things that we do right now, like I said, to connect, to communicate. So finally, we can collaborate more easily. We finally have an English website this year. So we started this project after Kim Fortune's visit last year. At the time, she was the forest president. Now we found that a lot of things that we've been doing in Taiwan was not that understood by the world. So we asked our younger STS scholars to help with that. So we finally have an English website. And this is our STM, our official journal. they publish a special issue online very quickly. I think it's one of the first journal to publish this about the COVID-19. So including some old article and some new, easy, small articles. And this is a special blog that's supported by Yang-Ming's STS program students. So they called it STS Ensemble. And they started as a blog, and they also do it on Facebook. So they have a new book seminar. So they wrote about, they hold talks. The audience is for people who are not necessarily STS student or scholar, but general people who are interested in STS. So if you can see that they actually have 5K likes on Facebook. So I think that's a lot. So this is another thing, another project we started after the COVID-19. It's the STS podcast. It's in Chinese, and we think it might be the first Chinese podcast about STS. So we will do an episode of 30 minutes interviewing STS scholars. So this one is about Wen-Hua's interview. And this is a new website that we just put out for a couple months after this new term of directors of the association. This is called STS Handbooks. So it's the steering wheel in Japanese. In Chinese, it means include many people from many different directions to include them. And in Japanese, it also means that we try to steer, or we try to provide some interesting sites while we steer the STS in Taiwan. So it's an earthy, easy reader collections. And this is, we're doing this kind of late. A lot of our social science and humanities scholars in different fields, anthropology, history, sociology, many, they have these kind of websites up and very popular for quite a period now. So we just joined in and hopefully to contribute some interesting articles. And this is the open the S file. So we have won 3 awards, including one from the 4S Making and Doing. And this took 4 years to complete. A total of 8 episodes, and each episode 48 minutes. And you use 330K, about 330K USD. And 40% of it was sponsored from Ministry of Science and Technology. The others are sponsored from the production company. And this is very important for us because this has made it a lot easier to promote the these program. But it also difficult to promote because most only have 40% of the contribution. So it's not entirely public or free. So it's a new trial, and we have learned a lot from working with the media industry. And later I will talk more about it. And this is a new project that hosted by Lin Wenyuan. This is sponsored heavily by the Ministry of Science and Technology. So they try to record and document all the things that happened during this period because of the COVID-19. And this is the new things that we do with the Taipei Biennial. And we are going to discuss 4 topics: offshore wind farm, assisted conception, plasticizer, and nuclear waste disposal. And because of the curator is Bruno Latour, so he started to talk with the Taiwan STS scholars how we can make this, we can try this negotiation simulation in the Taipei Biennial. And it's going to be up in November 20th, next week. We're very exciting. This has put us in a new platform, which people who may not be able to see or hear by STS will see this. And this is also a new format of teaching. So in conclusion, that Taiwan STS connect with all the traditional fields, and we are mature and experienced disciplinary disciplines. And the new collaborator might be art and image industry. And right now, our scholars have very important roles in large projects like University Social Responsibility Project, higher education reform, and most importantly, science policy. And now we have new native STS scholar, the new generations that they were, when they study, they were brought up, they study STS from, maybe from master and from PhD. And it's a little bit different from my generation, where we come to STS in a later stage in our professional development. So things are a little bit different. So we're trying to support them. And we really need easy and simple administration to make the association go beyond this point. So STS for Asia, I think that student training and connecting the younger generation is very important. And we try to join the Disaster STS network hosted by Kim Fortune. And I think we can do something similar about documentation or archiving the important research findings in Taiwan and also in Asia. And I think comparing science policy is very important. Like just said, after the Fukushima, I know a lot of STS scholars in Japan and in Korea are taking part in their transformation and taking part in setting the new policies and new guidelines, which in Taiwan, I'm sorry to say that I don't think we're at that yet. So we're trying to make ourselves important. And we can try to set up a new format of online meetings or a new norm during this post-COVID time, and really support our regional development of the STS community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hong. And if there is any question, you can raise your hand, or yes, Professor Shirabe? Yes.
Oh, no, actually, I just clapped my hand, not raised my hand.
All right.
Sorry.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, I found it very interesting that in Japan, history of science and philosophy of science tradition was very strong, and then the STS sort of emerging out of that influence. But in Taiwan, you know, education, communication, and engineering, art, and in medicine, all sort of very formative forces in making STS emerge, and then it's quite interesting comparison that we can make. And our next speaker is Hee-Je Park, professor of sociology, and you will see the Korean case shows a lot of sociological studies, and actually a number of sociologists are involved in creating STS community, and then Hee-Je is one of the leaders in that field. And very briefly, I'm going to introduce him. Hee-Je Park is professor of sociology and dean of College of Politics and Economics at Kyunghee University. So he's busy. he is taking up administrative positions. And then he's also a vice president of the Korean Association of STS and associate editor of EASTS. And he served the Korean Association of STS as chief editor of the journal, Korean Journal of STS, for many years, which brings today's presentation on the bibliographic analysis of the journal. So he's going to talk about the papers published in the journal and then the trends and other things. And Professor Park.
Okay, thank you. Unlike two previous presentations, I'm not going to discuss the history of our organization itself, but instead I'm going to focus on our journal, the journal of STS. And so in this presentation, I'm going to look into the research trends in Korean STS community using a bibliographic analysis of journal. And more specifically, I'm going to show what we have been doing in research and to what extent the STS has been institutionalized in South Korea. And actually, when I began with this study, I was interested in whether what we are doing reflects societal interest in science and technology. But for that part, I probably just throw an issue to discuss. Well, this slide shows a brief description of a data set, our journals. For 20 years, since 2001, we published 42 issues and 318 papers. That means the Journal of STS was published twice a year until 2018. But since the last year, we are publishing 3 issues a year. But in this analysis, I'm going to analyze the papers published by last year. Okay, let's look at the first, the number of papers and authors. This graph illustrates the change in the numbers of papers published in Journal of STS and the number of authors. Here, I counted only new authors. So we have a total 157 researchers who published at least one paper in Journal of STS. And the number keeps growing, indicating that STS community is expanding steadily in South Korea. And looking into the research fields of publications, policy or governance accounts for largest portion, and followed by theory and controversy and citizen participation and institutional sociology of science. And other fields like history of science and science education and philosophy of science have not produced papers in recent years. So, and when we began, actually, the history of science and the papers on history of science and philosophy of science and science educations, we have quite a lot of papers on those topics, but in recent years, those fields are disappearing. Well, when you get the research topics, a notable thing is the surge of papers on environment in recent years here, as we see. And the papers dealing with economic aspects of STS has also gained traction in recent years here, as we see. And the technological risk has long been a favorite research topic in Journal of STS, I think. And if we look at the fields of science papers, field of science, then the BT dominates so with large margin, followed by ICT and medicine. So if we consider BT and medicine in the same field, then I can say that where this field are actually dominating the interest of researchers. And however, the interest in medicine are relatively recent phenomena. So it is quite interesting. And only small number of publications on hard science, like physics and nanotechnology and etc. So unlike societal interest and those fields, the papers on those fields are quite relatively rare. And the affiliation of authors. So this slide shows whether KAIST attracts researchers from not only academia, but also other institutes. So as shown, although researchers are predominantly from universities, the portion has been reduced, as you see. And instead, the number of researchers from government-funded research institute looks increasing, the orange colors. And collaboration, yes, the research collaboration has also increased. For the first 10 years, a single authorship was quite dominant, but now research the collaborative research accounts for majority, and especially papers written with students has increased in the last decade. I think it has both positive and negative aspects. And the good thing is Journal of STS became a channel for publication to students. And but it might reflect the fact that if we have the best paper, then we just publish those in international journals instead of Journal of STS. Well, the trends in references. So I was interested in this part to look at the kind of the dependence of Korean STS scholarship on the Western side. So we see more papers funded by the Korean Research Foundation, which means STS has become institutionalized. However, the proportion has been reduced in recent years, again here, and it reflects perhaps there is no research group who succeeded in big funding, big grants like SSK in recent years. And here at this point, the paper funded was more than 80%. And at this point, as you know, the two SSK groups were working at that point. And then again here, again, oh sorry, the average number of references, Korean versus the English. So I hypothesize that if Korean STS is well established, then we would find more Korean literature in the references of papers published in JSTS. And please look at the bar, which shows the proportion. So please ignore the numbers. And if you look at the bars, then probably, unlike my expectation, I would say there is no increase in Korean references or the Western literatures and something like that. So Korean literature accounts for about 30 to 40% steadily. So there is no big changes. And so the number seems to be quite solid. And also there is very few references in other languages like Chinese or Japanese, etc. And cumulative, okay, so this is a trend in citations. So I use the Korean Research Foundation data, so we can roughly know how often papers published in Journal of STS have been cited by other papers in other journals, like including ours, I guess, and in KCI listed journals. So, and we can see the papers of policy and governance, and then theory fields tend to attract more attention than other fields from other scholars. And this number shows that it means that the paper published in 2010 were cited 54 times by year 2019. And the 39 means the paper published in 2019 were cited 39 times by 2019, means for 2 years, and these papers means for about 10 years, something like that. Okay, so, and again, I'm going to look at the average number of citation by research topics. So it is a little bit interesting, but it is quite understandable. So papers on Hwang-Woo-seok scandal have been most widely cited, and followed by the risk and environment and gender, etc. And the paper produced from funded research tend to get higher citation, means 3.35, than the independent research. So without the research fund, 3 times 0.9, which means if you got fund, then probably you may produce slightly better. It's hard to say, but it's a more cited research. Okay, it shows who worked with whom. So even if you published a lot as a single author, but if you do not collaborate with others, your names will not appear. But these parts are quite separated. So I'm going to look at only these two large networks of collaboration in South Korea. And so again, so as you see, okay, I'm sorry, there is only the Korean name. So I think okay, Song Wijin and Song Jiyeon, which represent the STEPI and represent the researchers on research policies or science policies, create a network here. And also this is Hong Sung-wook. I think it represents Seoul National University, and Lee Young-hee represent Catholic universities, and also the SSK, the large project funded by the government, which I mentioned earlier. And this is Kim Hyo-min, and also this is Park Bum-sun, which represent the KAIST network, and etc. And here, I think the Kyunghee University network, probably something like that. So, okay, so this is quite different. So if, again, I'd like to emphasize that even if you published a lot of papers, if it is just a single authored papers, then your work would not be counted here. So this is a collaboration. This is about the collaboration. Okay, the keyword analysis. So from now on, we are going to look at the results of the keyword analysis. Since there are too many keywords to display, I'm going to show the keywords appear 3 times or more. And the most often found keyword is a civic. It was 16 times. It was a civic participation. And the next is the governance and the transition studies and STS and constructivism and etc. And without questions, main keywords have changed over time. So periodization is necessary to understand what were the issues the Korean STS community were interested in. And here, so I use the period that each president governed Korea, partly, or mainly because I found the state policy has been changing by each president, and it had a great effect on STS. Not STS, actually, science and technology in general in South Korea, and also the related issues. So here I use the Korean keywords because although each paper in Journal of STS provides abstract and keywords in English as well as in Korean, but interestingly, so therefore actually Korean keyword and English keyword must be corresponding, but they didn't actually, I found. So the many researchers provide Korean keywords in Korean something and in English differently. So I use the Korean keywords, and I'm sorry that I cannot explain all the keywords on this figure due to time limit. So I'm going to just show the keywords at the center of the network, and I translated only those the main keywords, which we call it the structural whole of network. So in the during the Nomuhyun administration, which means from 2003 to 2007, if we look at the papers published in Journal of STS, the Hwang-Seok is one keyword which is at the center of networks of the other keywords, and the science technology community and the civic participation and science culture and PUS. So you can see, and those issues were key issues which STS communities in South Korea have been interested in during the time. Okay, I don't have much time. So, and here, these keywords are from Miss Media. So I look at the 1, 2, 3, and so 7 national newspapers and 2 broadcasting companies, so TVs, and with keyword science, and then I see some other keywords networked with the science is our country and juveniles, and the phenomena of juveniles' avoidance of science and technology and the stem cell and etc. And here Newton and physics and Hwang-Seok, etc. And with keyword technology, China, information, and Yongbyon nuclear facility in North Korea, and Russia, KAIST, and etc. And with the keyword of science and technology, we see the Korea and some for example, see the satellite, the Korea's first satellite, and something like that, and China, and something like that. So basically, what we have done, or what we have interest in, and what those issues covered by the Miss Media have no relations, I think. Okay, and then next is the Lee Myung-bak administration from 2008 to 2012. It shows a strong network on civic participation. Here is very interesting. Civic participation and governance and science and technology and democracy and politics of experts. So these are quite interesting core research topics which were collaborated with other issues. And I think it represents some of the large research grants we garnered during that time with 2 research groups. And also during the time, the risk here on the one hand, and innovation policies on the other hand, emerged as keywords, creating their own networks at the time. And during the time, if you look at the mass media, here with science, the most often associated keyword with science was the humanities and curiosity and education of genius, and perhaps at the time the Nobel Prize might garner lots of interest. I think something like that, and expertise. And here with the technology and some commercialization, smartphone, and LG and small and medium companies, etc., with keyword science and technology and R&D and the strong career, ICT and the humanities and creation of jobs, and those terms were with science and technology in the media during that time. Okay, let me go quickly. And during the Park Geun-hye administration, here the social problem solving R&D here, the governance, civic participation, and politics of expertise are the same, but the social problem solving R&D emerged as a new main keyword during that time. And also we can see renewable energy and appropriate technology on the other hand, and LC and undone science and synthetic biology we emerged as a new keywords. And during that time, if you look at the mass media, with science, the main keyword was China and evolutionism and creationism and etc. And with technology, the China and ICT and the small and medium companies like that with science and technology, and Park Geun-hye president, technology, OECD, and some creative economy, and etc. Okay, let's go. And finally, during the Moon Jae-in administration, the Korean regime, we can easily see the emergence of a policy studies network. So social problem solving R&D and living lab and innovation policies and transition studies, all these are actually related to policy, research policy or science policy or innovation policies, and which are also connected with the networks of civic participation, however, and also citizen science. So when we look, we are talking about the research policies, we actually discuss the civic participation and citizen science a lot, and also the AI is emerging very recently. And if you look at the mass media, perhaps due to the due to the discourse of the fourth industrial revolution, information and communication, and autonomous driving, and the AI, Hyundai Mobis, and the small and medium-sized companies, and those things are most often appeared with the keyword of science and technologies. Okay, and summary and implication, okay, which I can skip. And okay, and I think basically today, my presentation today shows big differences in subjective categorization of research topics and the results of keyword networks, I think. And the later means the keyword networks was greatly influenced by research groups and created by large research grants. And also here, the topics of research published in Journal of STS may not reflect key issues related to science and technology in Korean society. And perhaps the only exception is the Hwang scandal. And I don't like to say that, you know, STS research should follow or initiate the issue of our society has been focusing on. But I think I just like to throw the ball to think over, you know, in terms of social value of our research. And finally, there is no comparative studies. It is also interesting. I have been involved in the Journal of ECHO, the flagship journal of environmental sociology. And in the ECHO, there are a lot of, I would say it is not a lot of papers, but a decent amount of papers can be found which focus on the comparative aspects. So, and also from time to time, we can see papers on China, papers on Japan and Taiwan, etc. But very few papers deal with the case of other East Asian societies in Journal of STS. Perhaps EASTS actually is responsible for that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Park. And probably you haven't recognized that there is a lot of activities on the chatting, and which was initiated by Professor Shirabe. And his question is there any observable influence of fundings on the themes of the paper? And maybe Professor Shirabe, would you like to elaborate your question?
Yes. Actually, we have a sort of booms of engineering ethics and science communication, which were driven by funding programs specialized in each areas. And to be honest, we can see that kind of boom through the presentation of our conferences, annual meeting, and well. In some years, at least 30% or something like that of the presentation are related to engineering ethics or science communication. So I wondered if you have, similar experiences in papers or maybe in presentation at your academic conference. That is my question.
Okay, maybe I didn't catch your questions in full, but so you're talking about the engineering ethics parts in
sort of a correlation between the funding opportunities and the themes.
Oh, yeah.
And probably you mentioned in your presentation a little bit.
Yeah, of course, yes. As you know, I think it has great effect on the topics. I think so. When we apply for the large sum of grants, and there must be theme. So, and during the about 10 years ago, actually the two teams were succeeding in getting large sum of fund for actually 6 years. And the topics was the civic participation and the governance, the science governance stuff. So during that time, we could see many papers on those topics. And also, another thing, very important thing is, if you have such large research groups, then it is not just independent studies. So it is more likely to be a collaborative work. So you can work with other scholars. So even though it is just the same one paper, but I think the influence should be different. So the paper done by just one independent scholar and the collaborative, the paper produced by the collaborative work should be a little quite different. And then also the emergence of the interest in the environment might be influenced by the Anthropocenic, the new big project on the Anthropocenic the year by the KAIST, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the publication of the papers in a journal is very important in institutionalization of STS as a sort of a the independent discipline, and in that sense, I think our next speaker, Professor Wen-Hua Kuo, who is the editor of EASTS, will say a lot about that, and then I will briefly introduce him. Professor Wen-Hua Kuo is a professor at National Yang-Ming University, Taiwan, where he teaches social studies of medicine. His work revolves around pharmaceutical regulation and its social impacts in the East Asian context, and later controversies in East Asian medicine's attempts to be modernized and used globally. His scholarly publications appear in a range of journals crossing several disciplines, including Journal of Law, Medicine and Ethics, Drug Information Journal, East Asian Science and Technology and Society, and Social Science and Medicine. In addition to his current research on the changing of care and the caring professions, he has been served as editor-in-chief of EASTS, one of the few journals serving as a bridge between STS studies done in and about this region since 2016. And Professor Kuo.
Great. Okay, so everybody can see the slide. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this to join this wonderful panel, and congratulations to the Korean STS Society. I'm Wen-Hua Kuo, and as you can see that we're running a journal together. But the title of my presentation actually is Finding Intellectual Friends, and we have a mission to making STS East Asian. I think this is it's a good way to make friends. Actually, I have seen a lot of friends here, but I also remember some of my personal journeys of STS. 19 years ago, when I was a graduate student, last month, when I arrived in Japan in October, actually for my fieldwork, and I heard that the Japanese STS Association was founded just 2 weeks before that. So actually, if I could have arrived in Japan, 2 weeks, I had a chance to join the founding of Japan STS Association. This is my personal story. And the second story, actually 1 year ago, Kyunghee at KAIST and ESTS actually host the first ever student writing workshop. It's in Seoul, and I see a lot of new face. The new generation who are interested in STS, including the one actually here is Sangwoo Yo. I think he has graduated at that time, but somehow, yeah, I can see that it's kind of generational thing. Saying like, I came to Japan to learn STS at that time. For me, I was very happy to witness sort of the foundation of Japan STS Society, and 19 years from then, I have a chance to say to serve of the STS community as a lecturer and the moderator for the next generation that was in Korea. So I can feel like my personal intellectual journey is also the journey of the journal, and also the journey of the growing STS community. So that start my presentation, because I assume maybe some people do not know this journal. But I will say this, we try to make it's not a Taiwanese journal, but it's a journal for East Asia. So we call it East Asian brand. And evidence of this is that just 2 days ago, I got a paper about, they want to study, it's a review article on the STS papers on the energy policy, or say energy reservation. One of the 2 journals outside of Europe and the United States as ESTS. So I think it was somehow, I mean, this journal is very representative to this region. And also, as you can see in the slide, that we obtained the award from the FOS. It's a mainstream society, and we're also including some Web of Science metrics, intellectual metrics like HSCI or ANHCCI. So it's not just about like we are representative, but we also have some attractive features for people who want to get the papers published for promotion or other purpose. Okay, so briefly to say a little bit about the editorial board. Actually, the board is big. I'll show you a little bit, but I just want to highlight some of my Korean colleagues, including the previous presenter Hee-Je is he's our associate editor, and also I mentioned Cheong-Jun, who is also in the audience. He's another associate editor from Korea, and we have 40 editors, including you can see a lot of names. I mean, I think it's very familiar, and you are going to listen to them their talks or other things during this meeting. And we also have book review editors, including the current one is Jun Lee and Jun Lee. I mean, this as a foreigner, it's very hard to pronounce it, but somehow you know they're very outstanding scholars. And I also see some previous editors on this section here, so I want to say hello to you. And we have many Korean scholars serving as adversary editors, because they are, I mean, I think the network is very important. So from time to time, we need some professional help from the leading scholars in this region. And thank you for this senior scholars in Korea, or like who knows Korean to help us with that. The main idea for ESTS at the beginning actually is really to make East Asia STS. But the argument we want to make is just try to change a little bit about the worldview. Because for many people, I mean, at that time, they consider the world is composed by many states. And beyond that, we have regions, for example, like East Asia and the world. So I would like to call it it's a sandwich model. So a lot of people consider us as a regional journal because we cover regional stuff, and somehow we have ability to cooperate people in this states, in this region, and connect to the world. But I think it's not quite the case in STS, because STS is very interrelated. So I think like one of the methodological challenge we face, and we try to overcome, and try to innovate from it, is just try to change the meaning of region of that. So in 2016, we had a panel in Singapore saying about that. And one of the presenters and also our editor, Champa Trey, actually published a paper on that, on his presentation, and published in the Technology and the Culture. So I just want to say, like, it is our goal, just try to change the meaning of region. And the model in our mind is more like a network model. So we treasure empirical studies, because only standing in East Asia and working on cases here, you can find the real networks, I mean, conceptual networks, or networks that make the technology and science flow, can help us to understand this region better and to understand the world better. So this is a basic idea. Not like other international journals. So far, we still have a lot of semantic issues. And you can see that it's a generational change. If you want to say, although ESTS actually has a shorter history than Japan STS Association and Korean STS Association, but somehow we can catch some of the sort of the academic trend in STS in East Asia. on your left side, you can see is one of the earliest issues. That is on imperial universities. It's a Japanese imperial universities in Japan and its colonies. So this is one of the early issues we made, and we consider it as STS. I think that Shirabe-san already said it in his presentation. But 10 years from then, 3 years ago, we have a new issue that is focused not on the colonial period, but focus on what happened after the end of colonization by Japan. So that is sort of a new worldview, and we introduce a new idea, not like a post-colonial or post-something, but somehow we inherit some concept from the cultural studies, that is imperial studies. So we try to introduce some of the concept not familiar with STS of people here. And this is also the case. The one on the left side is one of the earliest issues gets edited by Hong Sung-Wood, our former associate editor. I think he's here too. Thank you very much. It's one of the many good hits. I mean, great hits at the time. And again, it says from the Huang scandal. Actually, Hee-Je already mentioned it. That did make our journal have a quick fame at the time. But 10 years from then, we have the beautiful issue gets edited by Hee-Je on the research misconduct. And this time, you can see not just the case from Korea, but also the cases from Japan and from China on this part. We just want to emphasize, say, like Huang scandal, maybe it's the beginning. We are sort of concerned with that kind of research practice. But 10 years from then, we have more ideas or new concepts that can interpret these things better and in the more complicated way. Okay, so with this same spirit, we gradually move ourselves from some traditional disciplines or say fields like history of science, anthropology, philosophy of science, technology studies, or sociology. We want to expand, the disciplines, that are useful for us. And we also try to make more complicated links between East Asia and the world. You can see, I will say, like from the right side, you can see, it's two issues from China, about China. When people talk about, things, about the current China, we have a special issue on, not special issue, but it's sort of the issue focused on, we call the Mao Zedong era. It's a Mao science. I think this is sort of the conceptual, or say it's a gap, because not many people working on that. And also we have the issue on biopolitics. And as you can see, it's sort of the ukiyo-e illustration. You can see that this is not the issue about Japan, but about like how to make Asian feel Asian in the sense of network. So the cases is from Korea, from Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, India on that. So it's a sort of a pan-Asian issue. And the one next to that, it's an issue on Cambodia and Southeast Asia. And the one, as far as it actually, it's the cover itself is from the Taiwanese Aborigine artist, and the idea is about something like a philosophy of science. It's about the role diagrams used in the scientific practice. So somehow we wanted to show is a wide range of disciplines invited, or say like we use as many tools as we can to interpret what's going on of science and technology in East Asia and the world. And the second part, I will say, like, with a quick outline about Korea's contribution to ESDS. Hee-Je has already made a good presentation about what's going on in South Korea, but we like to use some, rough data from our journal to see like what is Korea's influence, outside of Korea. As I already said, like one issue actually is exemplary of ESTS is guessed by Hong Sung-Woo, and we have 3 good papers. But somehow I will say, like after then, we have like 6 special issues out of 36 special issues in the following years, and we have 25 original papers on Korea, among them 19 by Korean authors. That means some Korean studies actually is made by non-Korean authors. For example, like John DeMoa at the Seoul National University is one of the sort of productive authors for our journal, and we want to introduce as many as we can on the books written by East Asian languages. And in the past 10 years, we have like 7 reviews on Korean books from the first year to the first 5 years of our journal, and another 5 from another 5 years. So I will say that the general impression I got is I think Korean scholars are active participants, but as a journal editor, I will say we want to expect them to contribute more if it's so productive. On the domestic journals, we hope they can try to write things for us. Hee-Je, I'm saying to you, so maybe because you have a good paper, so you should submit to us. All right, so finally, I want to say the big change we have. I think this is a good place to announce it. Maybe some people already know that we have been working with Duke for the past years. This is a splendid partnership, but somehow the Ministry of Science and Technology in Taiwan actually did not renew the contract with Duke. So that means our partnership will end very shortly in the coming month. So starting in 2021, we're going to work with Routledge. I will say it's not to say dramatic change, but I will say we'll try to keep the editorial team remain the same. So I'm still working, to serve you as editor-in-chief, but somehow now we're working very hard with my assistant. Actually, she's sitting next room to using my account. We're working very hard to make the transfer very smooth. Some will say we'll take the advantage from Routledge, and we still want to keep the high quality of editorial work, just like we have done with Duke. The main change I will say maybe is that we will have many sister journals, not like Duke, because Duke have a lot of good books on East Asia, but not the case on journals. It's not the case on Routledge. Routledge is pretty big, so they have many the STS journals, such as Tapuya. It's a STS, Latin American STS journal, and engineering studies by Gary Donney. Science as culture actually is longer than that, and interdisciplinary science reviews actually is a very maybe one of the oldest STS journals they have. So this is a totally new situation, and we want to see whether we can have more collaborations on that. And another innovation we have, it's as Wen-Ling said, it's kind of trend from textual text to images. The motivation actually is given by the 4S. If you follow the 4S, you can see in the past 3 years, they have several projects, and they link together, try to build up sort of digital archive from that. We are following this trend, and we want to make the website of our own. And we also, we started with covers, but I hope in the coming year we'll have a more full function website to cover news, fresh scholarship, not yet published, but good enough to share and to get more informations and the research opportunities. So this is, this is sort of the trend we want to do, and also this is a good place. I think to say something more clearly about what is East Asian STS, because I think like in today's panel we have seen a lot of aspects, say like people, institution, funding, and also the keywords. I think now is the time to have a more clear idea about what is STS. So this is sort of my unofficial, my personal manifesto about what is STS. I think like we'll have to make STS more transnational and find good cases like in East Asia, the world. And we also want to make East Asian STS method, to see the world differently. I would say like, it's not just to provide the research subject, but also try to test some of the new method, not yet try to other regions, and through that method, we can see the world differently. And also, I think like, Shirabe-san already said that we have traditions. In the case of East Asia, you can see the influence from the history and the philosophy, HPS, is still very strong. So I think like we respect that, but not limited it to certain disciplines. So that means that like we will welcome new perspective, method, and emerging connections within East Asia. I think that is a way where we are now, and that is thing we're going to do. So last picture actually just the workshop last year in Seoul, and I hope like everybody in this photo is doing well, and we invite all the people in the audience to join us. Thank you.
In the interest of time, I guess we have about having an extended time, kind of 15 to 20 minutes for discussion, and I guess for the chatting, I found Professor Sung-Woo Kong has a question. Professor Hong, would you like to open your video and say yes?
Hi, nice to meet you, Wen-Hua. And I have a question to Professor Park and maybe to Wen-Hua too. Thank you very much for a very interesting paper, Professor Park. And my question is about the topics of the Korean papers published in the journal. Do you think that the interest in citizen participation, governance, politics of technoscience, expertise, such topics are the unique feature of the Korean STS community? Your presentation seems to claim that the interest in those topics are sort of unique feature of the Korean STS community. But I can also see that the same topics were the topics of the special issues in EASTS journal. So I want to hear your opinion about that. And also I couldn't quite catch the one of your conclusions. Professor Park, when you mentioned something like that, these issues, these topics may not reflect some important, social issues of the Korean society or something like that. I didn't, I couldn't quite catch the meaning of, or I'm not so sure. I mean, if I mentioned the precise phrase, but so I would be grateful if you can elaborate on that conclusion. So those are my questions.
Okay. So my thought on the first question. So yes, citizen participation and the research governance, all these stuffs are very important topics, and which was represented by Korean scholars in JSTS, and also perhaps the Taiwanese STSers are quite interested in those parts. And I would not say that if you look at the only just the number of papers, perhaps we cannot say that these topics are representing the STS or STS in South Korea. However, if you look at some collaboration part, especially, so when you focus on these topics, and those scholars tend to be collaborated each other, so it created large sums of networks. So I think, so at least I think these topics is one of the representative topic in South Korea at least. And so if you look at some European STS journals or the American STS journals, of course there are a lot of papers on citizen participation and etc. However, those topics are not dominating in those journals. And the second part of social issues, yeah, I'm just throwing the issues. So when I began to analyze the keywords, I'd like to look at some kind of evidence that, the STSers influenced, some make a good influence on our societies, or vice versa, something like that. So I could not find that. So for example, public participation, all those stuff. So we know that actually STS has great effect on, some institutionalization of public participation in many part of science policy in South Korea. However, if you look at some mass media, there's not so much of evidence that we had great effect on those parts, and also on the opposite direction. So I'm just wondering if we, as researchers, are well responding to social interest on science and technology in South Korea. So I'm not arguing that we have to follow those kind of trends or those stuffs, but at least we have to consider it. So, in these days, social values of research is quite important. So whether we are just doing our research just for our personal intellectual curiosity, of course we cannot blame that. However, in other hand, if we can align with societal interest during that time, then probably STS can be more visible and can have a greater effect on our society. So we have to think about that.
Okay, so what about the influence of STS upon the social science? I mean, did you find evidence that the influence of STS on social science is gradually increasing, recent years, or?
In Korea, you mean?
Yeah, in Korea, yeah.
Well, perhaps public participation stops. So in earlier days, the consensus conference stops, for example, and those ways of deliberative democratic models were quite new to many social scientists. So However, after STSers introduce those concepts and also the practical method of doing that, during the technology assessments, for example, and many STSers are involved in having those kind of practices into the technology assessments processes, and many actually noticed those kind of parts. So, for example, environmental sociology. So when we look at the the controversies over nuclear plant, for example, we made some kind of deliberate forum on that, and those parts are, I think, some evidence of our influence on social sciences and our society in general.
And is there any other question, comments? While you are thinking, the Wen-Hua, yeah. Turn on the mic.
Okay, I have a question for Shirabe-san, and also for the panelists here, because you start your presentation with textbooks. Mm-hmm. I mean, the books, on STS related in Japan from 19th century to now. I'm just curious about whether you have any idea to have the handbooks in English, or say like that can present East Asia. Say maybe this is also the question for Wen-Ling and maybe a Bong-Sung, you say like whether is it possible to have a handbook of STS for us? Thank you.
Well, this is very interesting question. I have never imagined that, but well, it's a bit difficult to imagine what kind of contents we should put in that textbook, because if when we wrote our Japanese STS handbook, we call it's Japanese STS, but actually we are thinking to write STS handbooks in Japanese, and when we translated, when we wrote English handbooks, we think that this is a sort of brochure of Japanese STS to the world. So we have a special mind setting. But in this case, what is the meaning of East Asia? It's a really important concept, but still we don't have concrete ideas about East Asianness of STS. So, but I believe it will become great, challenge and interesting, activity for us. So I completely agree with your idea to start that kind of, things. So thank you very much for your question.
Yes, Professor Hong.
Yes, so in Taiwan, we do not have, I don't think we have lots of local STS textbook kind. So the most recent one is Fudawa wrote a very big one in review of his, the emerge of STS. But what we had is a more interesting version of STS, like this one. If you can read, this is for public participation on the technological society, and this is another series. This is published by National Jiao Tong University publisher. So this is technology, society, and people. So this is at the third episode, the third issue. So these are shorter articles. So they invited STS scholars and often include graduate students to write about their research into a smaller article. and then attach it with a bunch of questions and resources. So I think the aim is to provide these for educators in different disciplines who can use it for their courses and also for younger readers. We also have one that's written for high school students. So to get them interested, get them into the thinking of STS before they got too concrete with the traditional science concept. So I think this is a remarkable effort that's been put in by National Jiaotong University in Hsinchu. Yeah. And also, of course, the OpenDS file is stopped in English. So we hope this can be widely used by our colleague also in East Asia. That we, the Taiwanese Association has a public version. So if you want to use it for your course, you can let us know. We can give you access to it. It's currently on YouTube, but it's locked.
Actually, when I heard Professor Shirabe's presentation that Japan had a series of handbooks, and I was very envious. You know, the handbook is unlike, it's similar to journal, but it's different, and it's very important in institutionalization of the field, and the Japan did it, and then it's I think a big achievement, and in a different sense, and then you know, the EA STS is you know, aiming to be very international and trying to be open and inclusive, and it also has another institutionalization function. And then what I feel these, you know, now especially inspired by Hee-Je's talk, and there is not much sort of comparative studies like Japan, Korea, and then Taiwan and China, and rather each country's you know, authors you know, submitting their papers to EA STS and others, and so that collectively looking like an international and collectively looking like a regional, but not much very incisive studies of sort of inter-country international like studies, and how we can do that. I mean, how we can promote more studies in that direction. I think you know, Professor Hong's idea, you know, of the digester network is one very important way. Like you know, each country has a digesters, and so that we can have comparative studies like a Sewol-ho and other big engineering stuffs, and then or environmental issues, or I think the civic engagement, participation issues. Instead of just you know, the Taiwanese case or Japanese case or Korean case, maybe we can have a more comparative studies, you know, kind of project going on. Then maybe encouraging graduate students to go around, and then you know, having friends there. Like I like Wen-Hua's term, intellectual friends becoming real friends, and then having colleagues in other countries, and then you know, and each university is building up a sort of a system to support to stay or to go abroad, and at least in this region, and you know, the Kaohsiung and KAIST, Seoul or Tokyo Tech, and another, you know, we can have more dynamic exchange programs if we wish. I mean, our you know, each country's association or society can, you know, sponsor or support that kind of research, and as a way of encouraging sort of a collaboration at the very you know, the starting level. Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I found like ESTS is not just a academic journal, but we hope the papers published here can be used as teaching material. I think teaching is the best way to have the true influence on the next generation scholars. Let me show just one book. Actually, because Shirabe-san already said there are several handbooks, but this is one, I mean, I think I bought 1 year ago. It's this one. Sorry, okay. Okay, I don't think you can see the cover, but it's a cover. I mean, this is a book by published by University of Tokyo, and these were used for the liberal arts education. And I don't think it's an STS book, but they included STS topics in it. For example, it's a second book, they have 12 lectures. I think at least 2 or 3 actually is STS. For example, like how to teach climate change, and how to deal with AI, and how to deal with some military power, because you know this is a complex. I mean, it's a military academic complex. So I think this is a good way to show our influence. I think if we can have the sort of the reader, maybe not handbook, but the reader. We have some papers from our journal, and maybe some recommended papers written in Korean and Japanese or Chinese. We translate into English. Maybe that is more feasible. Starting point.
Yeah, that's true. It's a very good idea. Maybe you can start right now. I think you can start to pick up several papers from EASTS journal.
Well, one thing I should say, at the early years of our journal, we try to have a translation section. I think Professor Hong know that. I think the first time I read Kim Bum-baek's book, paper on the Korean medicine, actually it's an English translation of that. And later I learned that the Journal of History of Science journal, Korean Journal of History of Science, also have a section on translation. I think it's very good.
We'd like to have some questions or comments from early career scholars or graduate students. It's a good time. Anybody?
I thought the Japanese students are quite shy, but actually it's we are sharing the same tendency.
Or Professor Song Sang-yong, would you like to have any comments? You can just turn on the video and say something.
Hi, Professor Song. I really like to say, I did not expect. So
he's on the Zoom. Okay. Any other questions or Professor Bob? Hee-Je?
Okay. I think I didn't give my appreciation on the other presenters actually, and for Professor Shirabe's, I think the most impressive thing is actually one of the very interesting part was in the handbook. I think in one of your handbook you mentioned that there is one part of chapters on method actually. So you said those parts are about how to do case studies.
Yes.
For STS, something like that.
Yes.
So even though I look at the many handbooks on STS, I have not looked at, I have not found out any handbooks including the research method. Actually, in South Korea, in education, I think we are too much or actually focus on the theories in a way. So I think that part was quite impressive. And in Taiwanese cases, it was really fantastic about using all the the SNS and also all those kind of ICT stuff. And I'm very envy, and I think we should learn from Taiwanese cases. And for both of you, actually, however, my question is, actually, Professor Shirabe was talking about the effect of the demographic changes. Demographic changes. So the smaller numbers of young students have an effect on STS. And however, my thinking is STS is kind of fit for elite universities. So my guess was, perhaps that kind of demographic change has little effect on elite universities. So perhaps it was not so much effective, but as you mentioned that part, I'd like to hear some more concrete examples or what the concrete ideas how those parts have effect on STS in general. And in Taiwanese cases, there's no institutional platform in a way. So because there's no department or something like that, and how you can reproduce, so after getting PhD degree on this kind of discipline or the STS, then where you are going to get the jobs, higher education. So looks like in Taiwan, STS is quite popular, but I'm just wondering those kind of reproductions of the researchers.
So, Professor Hong, maybe.
Yes, thank you for the comment and questions. I think this is one thing that's very unique for Taiwan, is that we really do not have more than Yang-Ming's STS master program. We do not have PhD program. We do not have another STS program. That's the only one. So how do we attract so many students and scholars that stick in the field and stay to interact and really flourish with the field? We have a thesis award which attracts students from other fields to apply. And I think this is our way of promoting STS as a really useful and powerful tools for all the disciplines. I think this is our strategy. And like you said that it may not be feasible to have a PhD program or have another STS program, but that does not stop us to use STS and continue to research on STS. But we do have that problem supporting our younger scholar coming back from abroad, especially Europe and America, more from Europe nowadays. So those are generation which I call the native STS generation. They have encountered STS in an earlier stage. When they come back, they will identify themselves as STS scholar, which to all the traditional field will see them as other fields. So this makes it very difficult. But I think we as a slightly elder scholars, we want to mentor them as the new kind of educator, which can be used for different various purposes. Like we're doing a lot of international programs, international bachelor programs, which are hiring. And also we have university doing the Ministry of Education project, which is called University Social Responsibility Grants, which they are also hiring. So in a way that they have to fit into the higher education reformation or transformation, which is going on in Taiwan. And I think this would be very meaningful to the impact of the society, because we are changing eventually. So the traditional boundaries of those fields are getting more blurred, and we are emerging with new methodologies and fields, and which I think STS will adapt very quickly and well into this. And I can just say that this is our expectation and blessing for them, because it's changing so, so fast. Yep.
Well, thank you very much. Wen-Hua, very shortly, we have to wrap up.
Professor Shirabe.
Okay, so let's Shirabe some.
Okay. Well, actually, well, this is a matter of positions for STS scholars. So we had, several numbers of STS chairs or something like that in various universities. But because of decrease of population, means that universities themselves are shrinking, and because of that, actually there are, as I said, that there are several positions, but those positions are not for STS department, but just for faculty member who teach on history of science or STS in as a general education. But university tend to close that chair because of the diminishing of the new students. So that's why we are losing our memberships of society. So the number was more than 500 at our peak, but now it's about 450 or something in JSTS. So, and that trend will continue for several years, maybe decades. So the future of us are not so good. That's why I'm saying that that is a problem. That's it.
Well,
yeah, just surely echo Wen-Ling and Shirabe-san's work. I would say like institutionalization is important topic, and it is true that in Taiwan we only have a master program. But as a journal editor, I would like to encourage people to seek, higher education in other Asian countries. I think this is very important for our future, because English is just one of the academic languages. But I would say like you also need to be explored to some of the different cultures in Asia. So I think like if Korea had a good graduate institute, or Japan has graduate institute, even China, I think if you encourage to have the exchange program, or even to have master degree in Taiwan or in Japan or in Korea, and then just to find like whether you can have the higher degree in other country, because it's a higher education problem. So I think not only in Japan but also Taiwan also face that kind of we say like the winter. Yeah, I think the situation is not very good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, that's great.
In Korea too.
Yeah, can I have two proposals very shortly for this session? One is that I'm thinking about including a resource page on the Taiwan STS website. So maybe I will ask both sides, both countries, to maybe help us to construct a list of books, or just recently active research topic, just so that people can in Taiwan can know very quickly. I think we cannot do that, vice versa. The second thing is that to follow up with the previous talk about establishing STS association, I think maybe we can start talking with the younger generation that what do they want. If there is to be a Trans-Asia association, what kind of help, what kind of support, what kind of environment do they want? Because in the post-pandemic era, things can be constructed in a different way. So maybe this is the time to think about a new world.
Well, actually, as a session moderator, this is the time to to wrap up. but at the same time, we have to. I think I'm very glad that we share some common concerns and interests to have more interactions and creating more jobs and creating more excitements about STS in this region. And I think for that, I'd like to thank for excellent presentations and the discussions, and then thank you all for the presenters. And let's give them a big applause.